Zekthar's mandibles clicked nervously as he stared at the holographic display floating above his desk. The blue light cast eerie shadows across his chitinous face, highlighting the deep scars that ran from his left eye down to his throat. These weren't battle wounds from some honorable duel or glorious conquest. These were survival marks, carved by desperation and terror during what the galaxy now called the Human Campaign. The Kethari had ruled 17 star systems for over 3,000 years. Their empire stretched across the Andromeda spiral arm, encompassing hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. They were master tacticians. Their military academies produced the finest strategic minds in the known galaxy, and their technology was centuries ahead of most civilizations. When the first human scouts appeared at the edge of their territory, the Kethari High Command barely registered them as a threat. Zekthar remembered those early reports. He had been a young intelligence analyst then, fresh from the Imperial War College, assigned to the Outer Rim Monitoring Station on Kes Prime. The humans appeared to be a primitive species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Their ships were crude, their weapons seemed outdated, and their communication attempts were clumsy and inefficient. Another upstart species, Fleet Admiral Vorthike, had declared during the briefing, "We'll send a single battle group to their home system. A show of force should be sufficient to bring them into line." How wrong they had been. The first engagement occurred near the human colony of New Geneva. 3 Kethari cruisers, each one capable of glassing a planet, approached the modest human settlement expecting immediate surrender. Instead, they found empty space. The humans had evacuated everything, leaving behind only automated defense platforms that looked like mining equipment. Captain Herthak of the Cruiser Dominate had laughed when his sensors detected the crude human devices. "They're using industrial mining lasers as weapons," he had reported back to command. "This will be over in minutes." The mining lasers were indeed crude. They were also incredibly powerful, designed to cut through asteroid cores and planetary crusts. When the humans turned them on the Kethari ships, they sliced through military-grade shielding like it was tissue paper. The Dominate lost its entire starboard weapons array in the first volley. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was what came next. As the Kethari ships maneuvered to return fire, the humans revealed their true strategy. Hidden among the asteroid belt, dozens of small human vessels emerged. They weren't warships by any traditional definition. They were cargo haulers, mining craft, even civilian transports. Each one had been converted into a missile platform, loaded with crude but devastatingly effective kinetic weapons. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like cornered animals with nothing to lose. Zekthar pulled up the combat recordings from that day, footage he had watched thousands of times over the past 20 years. The grainy images showed human pilots ramming their ships directly into Kethari vessels, detonating jury-rigged explosives and sacrificial attacks that no sane military doctrine would ever approve. One human freighter captain, his ship's life support failing and his crew already dead, managed to crash his vessel into the Dominate's bridge, killing Captain Herthak instantly. The engagement lasted 14 hours. When it was over, all 3 Kethari cruisers were either destroyed or crippled beyond repair. The humans had lost 47 vessels and over 3,000 lives. By any measure of military efficiency, it should have been considered a devastating defeat for the humans. Instead, it was the beginning of the Kethari Empire's nightmare. Fleet Admiral Vorthake's response was swift and brutal. He assembled the 5th Battle Fleet, 37 warships including 2 dreadnoughts, and personally led them to the human homeworld of Earth. The plan was simple: complete orbital bombardment followed by a systematic elimination of all human colonies. The humans would serve as an example to other species who might consider challenging Kethari authority. The humans were waiting for them. Earth's orbital space was a maze of defense platforms, minefields, and weapon satellites. But again, these weren't traditional military installations. The humans had converted everything into weapons. Communication satellite Fired guided missile. Weather monitoring stations unleashed swarms of attack drones. Even civilian space elevators have been rigged with explosive charges, ready to collapse into devastating kinetic weapons. The battle for Earth lasted 6 days. Zekthar had been assigned to monitor communications from the flagship Imperial Will, listening to the increasingly frantic reports from Kethari commanders as they tried to make sense of human tactics. They're using their own children as soldiers, Captain Morthkess reported from the heavy cruiser Conqueror. I'm reading life signs consistent with human juveniles piloting attack craft. Impossible, Admiral Vortak replit. No species would send their young into battle. Sir, I'm uploading the sensor data now. These humans, they're not following any known rules of warfare. The humans weren't just using children as pilots. They were using everyone. Elderly humans who should have been in retirement commanded converted cargo ships. Civilian scientists jury-rigged laboratory equipment into weapons of mass destruction. Even human artists and musicians had joined the fight, using their knowledge of acoustics to create sonic weapons that could disable Kethari neural systems. But it was the humans' complete disregard for their own survival that truly terrified the Kethari forces. Every engagement became a brutal lesson in human determination. When cornered, humans would detonate their own ships. When captured, they would attempt to kill their captors with improvised weapons made from medical equipment or food preparation tools. When their weapons failed, they would resort to physical combat, using their crude but effective teeth and fingernails. Zekthar remembered the first time he saw a human in person. It was during the siege of Europa Station, one of Earth's outer defensive installations. The station had held out for 72 hours against continuous bombardment from 3 Kethari battle groups. When they finally breached the hull, the boarding parties found the human defenders still fighting with nothing but emergency tools and broken equipment. One human, a female who appeared to be past her reproductive years, had barricaded herself in the communications center. When the Kethari soldiers broke down the door, they found her surrounded by the bodies of her companions, her own body riddled with wounds that should have killed her hours ago. She was still alive, still transmitting intelligence reports back to Earth, and when she saw the boarding party, she smiled. "You're too late," she said in broken Kethari, blood streaming from her mouth. "They know you're coming." Then she activated a hidden explosive device that killed half the boarding party and destroyed the station's central computer core. The woman had been a librarian. Her job before the war had been organizing digital archives for historical research. She had no military training, no combat experience, no reason to die fighting except for the simple fact that she was human. That incident broke something in Admiral Vorthake's mind. Zekthar had been monitoring command frequencies when the Admiral's private message came through to the fleet. These aren't rational beings. They're madness given form. How do you defeat an enemy that welcomes death? The answer, as it turned out, was that you didn't. The siege of Earth continued for 3 more days before Admiral Vorthake made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Unable to break through Earth's defenses and unwilling to accept the casualties necessary for a prolonged campaign, he authorized the use of planetary bombardment weapons. The Kethari possessed technology capable of cracking a planet's crust and boiling away its atmosphere. It was considered a weapon of last resort, something to be used only against the most dangerous enemy installations. Admiral Vorthake turned it against a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. The bombardment lasted 18 hours. When it was finished, Earth's surface was a molten wasteland, its atmosphere stripped away, its oceans boiled into space. 7 billion humans had died, along with every other living thing on the planet. The Admiral expected this overwhelming display of force to end human resistance. Instead, it transformed the humans into something far worse than they had been before. The news of Earth's destruction spread through human colonies faster than Kethari ships could track. Within weeks, every human settlement in the galaxy had received the same message. Their homeworld was gone, their species was facing extinction, and they had nothing left to lose. That was when the real war began. human attacks on Kethari targets became increasingly desperate and creative. On the mining world of Zerth, human infiltrators released a biological agent that turned the planet's automated harvesting equipment against the Kethari workforce. On the trade hub of Neshtar Prime, human saboteurs crashed a massive cargo freighter into the orbital docking ring, killing 40,000 civilians and shutting down commerce for an entire sector. But it was the attack on Kethari Prime that finally showed the Empire what they were truly facing. Zekthar closed the historical files and pulled up the classified intelligence report from that day. Even 20 years later, reading it made his stomach acid burn with remembered fear. A single human ship had somehow penetrated the most heavily defended star system in the galaxy. It wasn't a warship or even a converted freighter. It was a simple passenger liner, the kind used for civilian transport between peaceful worlds. Somehow, the humans had acquired one and loaded it with passengers. The ship requested permission to dock at Kethari Prime's main orbital station, claiming to carry diplomatic representatives who wanted to discuss terms for human surrender. The message was transmitted by what appeared to be elderly human civilians, individuals who seemed harmless and defeated. The Kethari granted permission to dock, curious to see what terms the humans might offer and confident in their orbital defenses. The ship docked successfully. The human passengers disembarked and were escorted to conference chambers where Kethari officials waited to hear their surrender proposal. For 30 minutes, everything proceeded normally. The humans presented documents outlining territorial concessions and reparation payments. They seemed resigned to their fate. Then, without warning, every human on the station exploded. They had surgically implanted explosive devices in their own bodies, turning themselves into living weapons. The simultaneous detonation destroyed the orbital station's command center, killed the entire Kethari High Council, and sent debris raining down onto the planet's surface. The passenger liner, now revealed to be carrying additional explosives, detonated a few minutes later, taking out 2 more orbital installations and a small fleet of defense ships. In less than an hour, a handful of elderly human civilians had decapitated the Kethari government and crippled their primary naval base. That was the day Zekthar truly understood what the humans had become. They weren't fighting a war anymore. They were conducting a galaxy-spanning suicide mission, and they were perfectly willing to take everyone else with them. The image on his desk flickered, bringing him back to the present. His assistant, a young Kethari female named Sistra, was standing in his doorway with the evening intelligence reports. She looked nervous, probably wondering why her supervisor spent so much time reviewing old war files. "Sir, the daily briefings are ready for your review." Zekthar nodded and closed the historical files. "Any new human activity?" "No, sir. The galaxy remains peaceful. The last confirmed human vessel was destroyed 15 years ago." Peaceful. Zekthar almost laughed at the irony. The galaxy was peaceful because the humans were gone, exterminated to the last individual after a 10-year war that had cost the Kethari Empire everything they had built over 3 millennia. Peaceful because the alternative had been watching the humans drag every other species into extinction alongside them. "Thank you, Sistra. You may go." As his assistant left, Zekthar returned his attention to the files on his desk. Tomorrow marked the 20th anniversary of the war's end, and the Galactic Council had requested a comprehensive report on human combat tactics for their military archives. It was important work, they said. Future generations needed to understand how such a primitive species had come so close to destroying galactic civilization. But Zekthar knew the real reason for the report. It wasn't for historical education or military analysis. It was because everyone was still afraid. Afraid that somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the galaxy, humans might still exist. Afraid that the species that had turned children into soldiers and grandmothers into suicide bombers might return. Afraid that the beings who had made warfare itself into a form of madness might find them again. Zekthar touched the scars on his face, remembering the human soldier who had given them to him during the final battle for New Horizon Colony. The human had been dying his body broken by Kethari weapons, his ship destroyed, his species facing extinction. And yet he had smiled as he dragged himself across the deck plating, a crude knife in his hand, determined to take at least one more enemy with him into death. That smile haunted Zekthar's dreams. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose and found freedom in that terrible fact. It was the smile of a species that had looked at the end of everything and decided to make it their weapon. The humans were gone now. The galaxy was safe. But sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, Zekthar would wake from nightmares of burning worlds and laughing voices, and he would wonder if the humans had really lost the war at all. After all, 20 years later, the entire galaxy was still afraid of them. Maybe that had been victory enough. Zekthar's sleep medication wasn't working anymore. He stared at the empty injector in his hand, its blue glow fading as the last of the synthetic neurochemicals entered his bloodstream. The doctors had increased his dosage 3 times in the past month, but the dreams kept coming back stronger each time. Dreams of human faces, dreams of burning ships, dreams of that terrible laughter that echoed through space as another converted civilian vessel rammed itself into a Kethari battle station. He set the injector on his nightstand and walked to the window of his apartment. The capital city of New Kethar sprawled below him, its crystalline towers reaching toward the stars. Somewhere out there, millions of Kethari citizens were sleeping peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their empire had survived its greatest threat. They didn't know how close they had come to extinction. They didn't know what he had seen during the final year of the war. The chronometer on his wall chimed softly. 3 hours until his morning briefing with the Galactic Council's Historical Committee. 3 hours to prepare himself for another day of reliving the nightmare that had consumed his species for a decade. Zekthar activated his personal computer and pulled up the classified files from Operation Steel Rain, the Kethari's final attempt to eliminate human resistance. It had been his plan, developed during the darkest months of the war, when traditional military strategies had proven worse than useless against human tactics. The humans had been down to perhaps 1 million individuals scattered across 40 colonies. By any logical measure, they should have surrendered. Instead, they had become increasingly dangerous, as if proximity to extinction had stripped away their last restraints. The attack on the Kelmaron research station had been the final proof that normal warfare concepts didn't apply to humans. The station had been conducting classified research into quantum communication technologies, work that was years away from any practical military application. It should have been completely irrelevant to the war effort. The humans had somehow learned about the research and decided it posed a threat to their survival. Rather than attempting to capture or destroy the station through conventional means, they had done something that still made Zekthar's blood run cold 20 years later. They had recruited children, not adolescents trained as soldiers, not young adults driven by patriotic fervor. Actual human children, some no more than 8 or 9 years old by Kethari estimation. The humans had built small, one-person spacecraft designed specifically for child pilots, vessels so cramped and dangerous that only the smallest humans could operate them. These children had been launched from a hidden base in the Zirian Nebula, their tiny ships almost undetectable among the cosmic radiation. They had traveled for weeks through space, sustained by automated life support systems, guided by navigational computers programmed with a single mission: reach Kelmiron Station and prevent the research from being completed. When the children arrived, they didn't attempt to dock or even communicate. They simply flew their ships directly into the station's research laboratories, their small vessels loaded with just enough explosive material to destroy the quantum communication array. 12 human children died in the attack. The research that might have given the Kethari a decisive advantage in the war was set back by years. But the true horror wasn't the tactical success or even the deaths. It was the recordings. Kethari salvage teams had recovered fragments of the children's communication systems, audio logs that had been transmitted back to the human commanders during the final approach to the station. Zekthar had listened to those recordings, had heard the children talking to each other during their last moments. They weren't scared. They weren't crying or begging to go home. They were laughing. "Look at all the pretty lights," one young human female had said as defensive laser fire lit up around her ship. "It's like the fireworks Mama used to show me." "Race you to the big tower," another child had replied, his voice filled with the kind of excitement that should have been reserved for playground games, not suicide missions. The children thought they were playing. Somehow, the human adults had convinced them that flying explosive-laden ships into enemy installations was a game, a competition to see who could cause the most damage. Even as their crewed vessels were torn apart by defensive fire, the children had continued to encourage each other, celebrating successful hits as if they were scoring points in some incomprehensible sport. That was when Zekthar had realized that the humans weren't just fighting a war. They were reshaping their entire species into a weapon, programming their own children to find joy in destruction and death. The attack on Kelmaron wasn't a desperate military strategy. It was a glimpse into what humanity was becoming, a race that could turn love itself into a tool for genocide. He pulled up another file, this one containing intercepted human communications from their colony on Theta Proxima. The humans had established a research facility there, supposedly working on agricultural improvements to help feed their dwindling population. Kethari intelligence had dismissed it as irrelevant, another sign that the humans were finally accepting their fate and focusing on survival rather than warfare. The truth had been far more disturbing. The agricultural research was actually an attempt to weaponize human biology itself. The scientists on Theta Proxima had been working with genetic modification techniques, trying to create a strain of humanity that could survive in environments toxic to other species, not for colonization purposes, but as living biological weapons. The modified humans would have been able to breathe methane-based atmospheres, survive in extreme radiation, and process heavy metal contamination that would kill most organic life. More importantly, their bodily fluids would have contained compounds deadly to Kethari physiology. A single drop of their blood, introduced into a Kethari water supply, could have poisoned an entire city. The project had been discovered only by accident, when a Kethari patrol ship detected unusual energy readings from the Theta Proxima facility. By the time a full investigation team arrived, they found the colony completely abandoned except for a single human researcher. The scientist, an elderly human male named Dr. Harrison Chun, had been found in his laboratory, sitting calmly among containers filled with what appeared to be human embryonic tissue. When questioned, he had explained his work with the kind of matter-of-fact enthusiasm that other species reserve for discussing weather patterns. "We were so close to a breakthrough," he had told the Kethari interrogation team. "Another few months, and we would have had a viable strain. Humans who could live anywhere, survive anything, and carry death in their very cells." Dr. Chun had seemed disappointed by the interruption, not because his life's work was being destroyed, but because he wouldn't be able to see the results. When asked what he planned to do with such modified humans, his answer had been simple. Send them to live on your worlds, of course. Thousands of them, disguised as refugees or traders. They would have children, built communities, integrated into your society. And then, when the time was right, they would have released the toxins into your atmosphere. Billions of Kethari would have died before anyone realized what was happening. The scientist had been executed, his research destroyed, and Theta Proxima had been sterilized with orbital bombardment. But the incident had confirmed what Zekthar and his colleagues had begun to suspect. The humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were planning for a future where victory meant the complete extinction of every other intelligent species in the galaxy. That realization had led to Operation Steel Rain, the coordinated assault on every remaining human settlement simultaneously. No warnings, no opportunity for evacuation, no chance for the humans to implement whatever final desperate strategies they might have been planning. Zekthar had overseen the operation from the command ship Final Justice, watching as Kethari battle fleets appeared simultaneously in 40-star systems. The plan was simple: overwhelming force applied instantly, before the humans could coordinate any response. It should have been a perfect victory. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught completely off guard. Most of their remaining ships were destroyed before they could launch. Their colonies were isolated and defenseless. Within hours, human resistance should have been completely eliminated. Instead, the humans had given the Kethari one final lesson in the true meaning of warfare. As Kethari forces closed in on the scattered human colonies, something unprecedented happened. The humans began broadcasting on all frequencies, transmitting their conversations for anyone in the galaxy to hear. It wasn't military communication or desperate pleas for help. It was families talking to each other as their worlds burned around them. Zekthar remembered listening to those broadcasts from the bridge of the Final Justice, watching his tactical displays show the methodical destruction of human settlements while human voices filled the communication channels. "Sarah, can you hear me?" A human father's voice transmitted from a colony ship fleeing the destruction of New Virginia. "Your mother and I want you to know how proud we are of you. You did everything right, sweetheart. Everything we taught you. I love you too, Daddy," came the reply from another ship, probably one of the small craft attempting to evacuate civilians from the planet's surface. "Tell Tommy that his joke about the Kethari was really funny. I'm still laughing about it." "What joke?" Another voice interrupted, this one from a different location entirely. "I could use a laugh right now." And then, incredibly, as orbital bombardment reduced New Virginia to molten slag, a young human male had told a joke about Kethari mating habits that was so absurd and inappropriate that even some of the bridge crew on the Final Justice had involuntarily chittered with amusement. The humans were dying, their species being systematically exterminated, and they were sharing jokes. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. As more colonies fell and more families were separated forever, the human communications became a kind of impossible celebration. Parents told their children how much they loved them. Grandparents shared final stories. Friends made impossible promises to meet again somewhere beyond death. "Remember when we used to have picnics by the lake?" One human female transmitted as her ship was torn apart by Kethari fighters. "Remember how the sunlight looked on the water? That's what I'm seeing now. That's what I'll always see. Save me some cake," came the reply from another doomed vessel. "I'll be right there." The humans were turning their own extinction into a kind of celebration, as if dying together was the greatest victory they could achieve. And somehow, impossibly, they made it feel like victory. Even as Zekthar watched his forces methodically destroy the last remnants of human civilization, he felt like he was witnessing something sacred being torn apart. The final human transmission had come from a small research outpost orbiting a dead star at the edge of the galaxy. The station held perhaps 50 humans, scientists, and their families who had been studying stellar collapse patterns. When the Kethari battle group arrived to destroy them, they didn't try to run or hide. Instead, they had transmitted a message addressed to every species in the galaxy. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, speaking for the last free humans in the universe. In a few minutes, we will be dead, and our species will be extinct. We want the galaxy to know that we do not surrender, we do not repent, and we do not forgive. We also want you to know that we understand why this happened. We understand that we became something terrible, something that threatened every other form of life. Perhaps you were right to destroy us. Perhaps the galaxy is safer without humanity. But we want you to remember something as well. We were not always what we became. We were explorers once, and artists and dreamers. We created beauty and sought knowledge and loved our children. We became monsters because you taught us that we had to be monsters to survive. The choice you make next will determine what kind of galaxy our children inherit. Choose wisely." The transmission had ended there. A few minutes later, the research station was reduced to debris by Kethari weapons fire. Dr. Elena Vasquez and the last free humans in the universe were dead. But her words had spread throughout the galaxy faster than the news of humanity's extinction. Within days, every major species had received copies of her final message. And slowly, over the years that followed, Those words had begun to change how the galaxy remembered the war. Zekthar closed the files and walked back to his window. The capital city was beginning to wake up, its inhabitants preparing for another day in their peaceful, human-free galaxy. But he wondered how many of them still heard Dr. Vasquez's voice in their dreams, asking them to remember that the humans hadn't been born as monsters. They had been made into monsters. By fear, by desperation, and by the terrible mathematics of extinction warfare. And now, 20 years later, Zekthar couldn't escape the feeling that the Kethari Empire had become something monstrous as well. Something that could convince itself that genocide was mercy, that extinction was peace, and that the silence of dead worlds was preferable to the laughter of dying children. The chronometer chimed again. 2 hours until his briefing. 2 hours to prepare himself for another day of explaining to the galaxy why the complete extermination of an entire species had been the only possible choice. The Galactic Council chambers had been redesigned since the war. The old circular arrangement, where all species sat as equals around a central speaker's platform, had been replaced with a hierarchical structure that put the Kethari delegation at the head of the room. It was supposed to reflect their role as the galaxy's protectors, the species that had sacrificed so much to preserve interstellar civilization. Zekthar stood at the speaker's podium, looking out at representatives from 47 different species. They watched him with a mixture of respect and unease, the same expression he'd grown used to over the past 20 years. He was a war hero, a survivor of humanity's final desperate campaigns, a witness to things that most civilized beings couldn't imagine. He was also a reminder of what it had cost to win. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. I am here today to present the final classified analysis of human combat psychology, completed after 20 years of study and documentation. This report represents the Kethari Empire's official conclusion regarding humanity's transformation during the final decade of their existence. The chamber was completely silent. Even the usually restless Sekatari delegates had stopped their constant chittering to listen. Everyone wanted to understand what had happened, how a species that had seemed so primitive had nearly brought down galactic civilization. The key to understanding human warfare, Zekthar continued, lies in recognizing that they didn't fight like a military force. They fought like a social organism experiencing catastrophic trauma. Every human civilian became a potential weapon. Every human child a possible suicide bomber. Every human settlement a trap waiting to be triggered. Ambassador HFY Story of the Madrani Consortium raised a tentacle. Intelligence Officer Zekthar, our historians have reviewed human cultural archives from before the war. They appear to have been a relatively peaceful species, with strong prohibitions against violence toward their own young. How do you explain their sudden transformation? Zekthar had been expecting this question. He activated his holographic display, showing images from early human colonies, peaceful agricultural settlements where human families had raised their children in safety and prosperity. The transformation began with Earth's destruction, he explained. But it wasn't immediate. During the first year after their homeworld's bombardment, human resistance actually decreased. Many colonies attempted to negotiate surrender terms or relocate to neutral space. The display shifted, showing intelligence reports from that early period. Peaceful human ships requesting safe passage through Kethari space, diplomatic messages offering territorial concessions, even some humans asking for asylum on alien worlds. The change came when they realized that survival was impossible. New images appeared on the display. Recordings from the Theta Centauri incident, where Kethari forces had accepted a human colony's surrender and then executed every civilian to prevent future resistance. The massacre at New Berlin, where fleeing human refugees had been hunted down and killed for sport by Kethari naval pilots. The processing centers where captured human scientists had been subjected to torture disguised as intelligence gathering. The humans realized that we intended to exterminate them completely, regardless of surrender or cooperation. Once they understood this, their psychology underwent what our xenobiologists now classify as a species-wide stress response. They stopped thinking about survival and started thinking about legacy. Zekthar paused, remembering the first time he'd read the psychological profiles developed by HFY scientists. The humans hadn't gone insane, as many had assumed. They had gone beyond sanity into something else entirely. Humans began to ask themselves a single question. If our species is going to die, what do we want the galaxy to remember about us? Their answer shaped every action they took during the final years of the war. Ambassador Kethmore of the Realian Republic leaned forward. What answer did they choose? They chose to be remembered as the species that could not be conquered, not the species that surrendered gracefully, not the species that accepted their fate with dignity, but the species that made extinction so costly that no one would ever want to repeat it. The holographic display showed new images now. Human children playing with toy spaceships that were actually training simulators for suicide runs. Human parents teaching their offspring how to build explosive devices from household materials. Human teachers conducting lessons on anatomy and physiology that were actually instruction in how to kill different alien species as efficiently as possible. They redesigned their entire civilization around a single principle. If we must die, we will make our deaths so terrible that the galaxy will spend the next 1,000 years afraid to threaten anyone else the way they threatened us. Delegate Horthek of the Cavern Trade Federation stood up abruptly. That's impossible. No rational species would sacrifice their own children for psychological warfare. Zekthar looked at him steadily. The humans had moved beyond rational thinking, Delegate. They were operating on pure evolutionary response. When a species faces extinction, normal survival instincts can become inverted. Instead of protecting individual lives, they focus on ensuring the survival of their genetic and cultural information. He activated a new section of his display, showing one of the most disturbing discoveries from the war's aftermath. Hidden data storage facilities that humans had built throughout the galaxy, automated systems designed to activate years or decades after humanity's extinction. We've discovered over 300 of these cultural time bombs in the past 20 years. Each one contains complete archives of human history, human art, human philosophy, and detailed documentation of their war against us. They're designed to be found by other species, to tell humanity's story from their own perspective. The chamber erupted in concerned chittering and clicking as delegates realized what this meant. Even in death, the humans were still fighting, still trying to influence the galaxy's perception of what had happened. But that's not the most significant aspect of their strategy, Zekthar continued. The humans weren't just trying to preserve their own memory. They were trying to change us. He showed them the final phase of human psychological warfare. The campaign's designed not to inflict military damage, but to force the Kethari and their allies to become the kinds of beings that would exterminate an entire species. They wanted to prove that any civilization capable of destroying humanity would necessarily become monstrous in the process. Every atrocity we committed against them was carefully documented and transmitted throughout the galaxy. Every time we were forced to kill human children, every time we had to destroy civilian settlements, every time we chose total war over negotiated peace, they made sure the entire galaxy was watching. The truth was becoming clear to the delegates now. The humans hadn't just been fighting for their own survival. They had been fighting to transform their enemies, to force the Kethari Empire to reveal its true nature under extreme stress. They succeeded, Zekthar admitted. By the end of the war, we had become exactly what they wanted us to be, a species so traumatized by our experience with humanity that we would never again underestimate a primitive opponent. A species so afraid of human-style warfare that we would negotiate rather than fight whenever possible. A species that had learned to fear extinction-level threats above all else. Delegate Vashti of the Crystalline Assembly spoke up. Are you suggesting that the humans deliberately orchestrated their own extinction as a form of victory? I'm suggesting that the humans redefined victory itself. They couldn't prevent their physical destruction, so they focused on ensuring their psychological and cultural immortality. 20 years after the last human died, we still make every major military decision based on the question, what if our enemies fight like humans? The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans had lost the war completely, suffering total extinction. But they had also won, in a sense, by fundamentally changing how warfare was conducted throughout the galaxy. Zekthar activated his display one final time, showing the most classified information in the Kethari archives, psychological profiles of modern galactic leaders, including himself. Every major military commander in this galaxy now suffers from what our psychiatrists call human war syndrome. We can't sleep without medication. We can't look at pictures of our own children without remembering human children piloting suicide craft. We can't hear laughter without remembering the sound of dying humans celebrating their own deaths. The profile showed brain scan patterns, stress hormone levels, neural activity measurements that painted a picture of an entire generation of leaders psychologically scarred by their encounters with human warfare. The humans may be extinct, but they achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They made themselves unforgettable. Every species represented in this chamber has modified its military doctrine based on human tactics. Every government has developed contingency plans for extinction warfare. Every parent in the galaxy now knows to fear the children of their enemies, because the humans taught us that even children can be weapons. Ambassador Tetrasisra spoke again, her voice quieter now. Intelligence Officer Zekthar, do you believe the humans knew this would be the result of their actions? Zekthar thought about Dr. Elena Vasquez's final transmission, about her warning that the galaxy's choice would determine what kind of place their children inherited, about the human soldier who had smiled as he died, as if death itself was just another form of victory. Yes, he answered simply. I believe they knew exactly what they were doing. The humans understood something about warfare that the rest of us had forgotten. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that kills your enemies, but the one that changes them into something they can't live with being. He deactivated the display and looked out at the assembled delegates, representatives of species that had survived the human war, that had built a new era of galactic peace on the foundation of humanity's ashes. The humans taught us that any species can become monstrous under the right circumstances. They taught us that extinction warfare transforms everyone involved, victim and perpetrator alike. Most importantly, they taught us that some victories are worse than defeat. Zekthar paused, touching the scars on his face unconsciously. The question we must ask ourselves now is whether we learned the right lessons from their sacrifice. Are we building a more peaceful galaxy because we understand the true cost of total war? Or are we simply more afraid to fight because the humans showed us how terrible we could become? The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Delegate Horthek stood up again. Intelligence Officer Zekthar, what do you believe the humans would want us to learn from their extinction? Zekthar considered the question carefully. He thought about the human children who had died laughing, about the families who had turned their final moments into celebrations, about the species that had chosen to be remembered for their defiance rather than their surrender. I think they would want us to remember that extinction warfare destroys everyone involved. The humans didn't just die in that war. We all died a little. We all became less than we were before. The galaxy is safer now, yes, but it's also smaller, sadder, more afraid. He looked directly at each delegate in turn. I think the humans would want us to choose negotiation over extermination, understanding over fear, and peace over the kind of victory that requires genocide. But, most of all, he concluded, I think they would want us to remember that they were more than the monsters we made them become. They were explorers and artists and dreamers, just as Dr. Vasquez said. They became something terrible because we forced them to choose between extinction and transformation. Zekthar stepped down from the podium, his presentation complete. As he walked toward the exit, he heard the delegates beginning to discuss his report in hushed tones. They would debate his conclusions, analyze his data, and eventually file the entire report in classified archives where future generations might someday discover it. But he knew that the real impact of his presentation wouldn't be found in any official record. It would be in the dreams of everyone who heard it, in the quiet moments when they wondered whether the humans had been right about the galaxy's capacity for monstrosity. The humans were extinct. The war was over. But their greatest victory was still unfolding, one nightmare at a time, in the minds of everyone who had survived their defiance. And somewhere in that victory, Zekthar suspected, was the seed of a better galaxy. A galaxy that had learned to fear its own capacity for evil more than it feared any external enemy. The humans had taught them that lesson with their lives. Now it was up to the survivors to decide what to do with it. 3 months after his presentation to the Galactic Council, Zekthar received a message that changed everything. It arrived through encrypted channels, transmitted from an automated probe that had been drifting through deep space for over 18 years. The message was simple, consisting of only a few lines of text, but it made his blood freeze in his veins. To any surviving members of galactic civilization, my name is Captain Sarah Chun, last commander of the human vessel Endurance. If you are receiving this message, it means our automated systems have detected signs of renewed spacefaring activity in this sector. We have been waiting. Zekthar read the message 17 times before his hands stopped shaking enough to activate his emergency communication protocols. Within hours, the highest levels of Kethari government were convened in emergency session. Within days, every major species in the galaxy had been secretly informed of the message. The humans weren't extinct. The probe had been launched from somewhere beyond the galactic rim, from a region of space so remote that no civilization had ever bothered to explore it. Long-range sensors immediately began sweeping that area, looking for any signs of human presence. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Hidden among the dark matter clouds and stellar debris of the outer rim, human settlements had been growing for over 2 decades. Not cities or colonies in any recognizable sense, but vast manufacturing complexes built into asteroids and dead planets. Facilities that showed clear signs of massive industrial activity. Energy signatures that suggested weapons development on an unprecedented scale. The humans had survived. More than survived. They had been preparing. Zekthar found himself assigned to the hastily assembled intelligence task force charged with analyzing the discovery. As they gathered more data through long-range surveillance, a terrifying picture began to emerge. The humans who had escaped the final purge hadn't fled to rebuild their civilization. They had fled to remake it entirely. The settlements on the galactic rim showed no signs of the agricultural development, residential areas, or cultural centers that characterized normal colonization efforts. Instead, every structure seemed designed for a single purpose: the production of weapons and military personnel. But these weren't the improvised weapons and converted civilian craft that had characterized human resistance during the war. The energy signatures detected by Kethari sensors suggested technology decades ahead of anything previously seen from humanity. Somehow, in their exile beyond the galactic rim, the humans had made enormous technological leaps. They've had 20 years to think about nothing but revenge, Admiral Kestar observed during one of their briefings. 20 years to design weapons specifically intended to kill us. It's worse than that, Zekthar replied, studying the latest sensor data. Look at these population estimates. Even accounting for natural reproduction, there are far more humans out there than should be possible given the numbers who escaped the purge. The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just been building weapons during their exile. They had been building people. Massive cloning facilities, artificial gestation chambers, genetic modification laboratories. They had turned their entire species into a military-industrial complex. But the most terrifying discovery came when they finally intercepted human communications from the Outer Rim settlements. The humans weren't planning another war. They were planning something far more sophisticated. Captain Sarah Chen's second message arrived a week later, this time transmitted directly to every major population center in the galaxy simultaneously. She appeared on viewing screens throughout Kethari space. A middle-aged human female with cybernetic implants covering half her face and mechanical modifications that suggested decades of survival in hostile environments. Citizens of the galaxy, she began, her voice calm and measured. 20 years ago, you made a choice. You decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to continue existing. You hunted us to the edge of extinction and congratulated yourselves on preserving galactic peace. Her image was being transmitted from somewhere in deep space, the background showing the vast construction projects that the humans have been working on for 2 decades. We want you to know that we understand your decision. We have had 20 years to think about what we became during those final months of the war. We know that we transformed ourselves into something monstrous, something that threatened every other form of life in the galaxy. Zekthar watched the transmission from the emergency command center, surrounded by military leaders who were calculating response times and weapon capabilities. But Captain Chin's next words made those calculations irrelevant. We have chosen not to repeat your mistake. We have chosen not to become genocidal monsters like you did. The camera pulled back, revealing the scope of human construction in the outer rim. Massive ring structures orbiting dead stars, generation ships large enough to house millions of individuals, and, most disturbing of all, what appear to be terraforming equipment capable of creating habitable world from cosmic debris. Instead, we have built something new, a mobile civilization that exists beyond your reach, beyond your ability to threaten or contain. We have made ourselves independent of planets, of star systems, of anything that you might target for destruction. The implications hit Zekthar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't been preparing for another war. They had been preparing to make war impossible. We are leaving your galaxy, Captain Chen continued. Not because we are defeated, but because we choose not to share space with species capable of genocide. We have developed faster-than-light technology that will allow us to reach other galaxies, other clusters of stars where we can build new worlds far from your influence. The transmission showed images of human children playing in vast, rotating habitats, of humans working alongside artificial intelligences that seemed decades ahead of anything the Kethari had developed, of a civilization that had transcended the need for planetary surfaces or fixed settlements. But before we go, we want to leave you with a gift. The image shifted again, showing massive automated vessels departing from the human installations. Not warships, but something that looked like a combination of research station and manufacturing plant. We have created a technology that will ensure you never again need to face the choice that led to our near extinction. A technology that will make genocide impossible in this galaxy. Zekthar's communication panel lit up with panicked transmissions from across Kethari space. Similar objects had appeared simultaneously in the home systems of every major galactic civilization, massive automated stations that had simply materialized from faster-than-light travel. These stations will monitor every planet, every space lane, every military installation in the galaxy. They will observe, they will record, and they will remember. Any attempt to commit genocide against any species will result in immediate intervention. The camera focused on Captain Chen's face again, and Zekthar could see something in her eyes that hadn't been there during the war. Not hatred or anger, but something far more unsettling, disappointment. The stations are completely autonomous and beyond your ability to destroy or disable. They are powered by technologies you don't understand, protected by defenses you can't breach, and programmed with a mission you cannot alter. They will prevent any species from suffering the fate that humanity nearly suffered. Admiral Kestar stood up from his command station. This is impossible. No automated system could be sophisticated enough to distinguish between legitimate military action and genocide. Captain Shin seemed to anticipate the objection. The stations don't just monitor military activity. They monitor intent. They can read neural patterns from orbital distance, analyze communication patterns, detect the psychological indicators that precede genocidal behavior. They know when a species is planning extermination, and they will act to prevent it. The transmission showed demonstrations of the station's capabilities. Holographic displays revealed every major military base in Kethari space, complete tactical analyses of current force deployments, even recordings of classified conversations between government officials. The stations have been observing you for the past 3 months since we first announced our survival. They have recorded your debates about whether to launch a preemptive strike against our installations, your discussions of weapons capable of destroying entire solar systems, your plans to prevent our escape through superior firepower. Zekthar felt his stomach acid burn as he realized the implications. Every secret military planning session, every classified intelligence briefing, every private conversation about human threats had been monitored and recorded. You proved that you learned nothing from our war. Given the opportunity to negotiate, to seek understanding, or to simply let us leave in peace, you immediately began planning another genocide. This confirms our decision to depart your galaxy permanently. The camera pulled back one final time, showing the massive human fleet preparing for departure. Thousands of vessels, many of them clearly designed for multi-generational voyages, others that seemed to be mobile manufacturing centers capable of building entire civilizations from raw materials. The stations will remain active for the next 1,000 years, ensuring that no other species suffers what humanity suffered. After that time, assuming you have learned to resolve conflicts without resorting to extinction warfare, they will deactivate themselves and return to deep space. Captain Chen paused, and for a moment her expression softened slightly. We want you to know that we don't hate you for what you did to us. We understand that you were afraid, that you made what seemed like the only choice available. But we also want you to understand that there are always other choices. The stations will teach you to find those choices. They will force you to negotiate instead of exterminate, to compromise instead of conquer, to build peace instead of purchasing it with genocide. The transmission began to fade, but Captain Chun had one final message. In 1,000 years, if your species have learned to coexist without resorting to extinction warfare, you will be welcome to contact us. Our automated systems will be monitoring for signs of genuine galactic peace. When you achieve it, we will send you the coordinates of our new home, and perhaps our species can meet again as friends rather than enemies. Until then, goodbye, and thank you for teaching us that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to play the game. The transmission ended, leaving the emergency command center in complete silence. Within hours, reports began arriving from across the galaxy confirming that the human fleet had departed for intergalactic space, traveling at speeds that existing physics couldn't explain. The humans were gone, but their monitoring stations remained, silent sentinels watching every world, every ship, every conversation that might lead to another genocide. Zekthar walked to his office window and looked out at the capital city of New Kethar. Somewhere high above, invisible but undoubtedly present, one of the human stations was watching, recording, judging. For the first time in 20 years, he felt hope. The humans had found a way to win without destroying their enemies. They had chosen to prevent future genocides rather than commit revenge genocide. They had transformed their greatest weakness, their inability to match the galactic civilizations in military power, into their greatest strength, the moral authority to judge and constrain the behavior of species capable of extinction warfare. Zekthar touched the scars on his face, remembering the dying human soldier who had smiled as he fought to take one more enemy with him. The human had been fighting for survival in the only way he knew how. But Captain Sarah Chun and her people had found a better way to fight. They had fought for justice instead of survival, for peace instead of victory, for a future where no other species would face the choice between becoming monsters or becoming extinct. The galaxy was being watched now. Every government knew it, every military leader understood it, every citizen was beginning to realize it. The human monitoring stations had changed the fundamental nature of galactic politics overnight. Wars would still happen. Conflicts would still arise. But genocide had become impossible, not because the physical capability had been removed, but because any attempt would be immediately detected and prevented by the Watchers in the dark. The humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had made themselves the galaxy's conscience. Zekthar opened his desk drawer and removed the sleep medication he had been using for 20 years. He looked at the injector for a long moment, then placed it in his waste disposal unit. For the first time since the war ended, he thought he might be able to sleep without nightmares. The humans were still out there, somewhere among the distant galaxies, building new worlds and raising new generations far from the space that had almost destroyed them. And here, in the galaxy they had left behind, their silent sentinels kept watch over species that were slowly learning that some victories were indeed worse than defeat. The war was finally over. The humans had won, and everyone was alive to see the peace that victory had brought.